I wanted to talk about something that is currently interesting me the most in this broad space of participatory media or user-generated content, however you want to call it. So I thought I would start with a little bit of overview, or you could say even theory, because my background is in sociology. I'm originally trained as a sociologist. I'm not a technologist by training. So if you bear with me, I'd like to start off with sort of giving you my approach to creating cool new social services on the internet. And then towards the end of the talk, then I'll talk a little bit about microblogging and what we're doing there, because that is where I think that the most interesting stuff's happening right now. So, but to get started, I wanted to just pull up this list that is probably very familiar to a lot of you. It's a search engine called Alexa that essentially ranks the most popular sites on the internet. And this is actually not the most recent list from this morning, but it is fairly recent, so I don't expect there to be many discrepancies. You can go online and check it right now if you're on the back channel for any mistakes. But very briefly, I'm sure that the first 10 are of no surprise to anyone. And probably there are a lot of sites out there on the list that you recognize. But I've been looking at this list over the last 3 years now, I'd say, in various formats. And there's something interesting that's been going on here. Something of what I would say is actually a mega trend that is swiping over the web services on the internet right now. It's that an increasing number of the most popular services are starting to be based entirely on this user-generated contents. So I'm just going to highlight in blue the ones on this list that I believe are sort of have been built around participatory media or user-generated content, sort of at the heart from the very beginning, at its core. Almost all the sites nowadays incorporate some version of it. And over the years, or over the past months even, what's been interesting to follow is that every time I give this talk and every time I show this list, I have to add more blue. And there are sites on there, very, very well recognized brands, for instance, the New York Times, that used to be up quite high on the list of top 100. And I've been watching it slowly drop. And in fact, now you can no longer see it. New York Times has dropped. It's no longer in the top 100 on the internet. So what's going on here? This talk has 3 parts. First, I'll try to explain what I believe is the sort of motivating driver for actually interacting online. It's what I call social objects. And then second, I'll try to do something that I've only recently started doing in public, but I've been privately in discussions over the last year and a half or so, been sort of interested in this, which is trying to formulate some principles. I'd say working principles. Principles are really, it sounds very grand, but these are very small principles, draft principles for how to create your own site. When you guys are working on your companies, I'm sure everyone here has a website, their company has a website. You might be in marketing business, you might be creating websites for others. How do you create a compelling offering online? That's what I'll try to talk about. And I'll share with you my sort of 5 findings so far on what I believe are sort of key things to remember when creating these services. And then last, I'll take my sort of, because what happens is when I give this talk, I notice most often the thing that comes up is a question from the audience, well, what do you think is coming next? So I'll try to preempt that and answer your question first. Okay. Oh, there's Petteri, there's my co-founder. Hi. We need some kind of a two-way interaction going here next time. All right, so, but to begin, there's an interesting thing that's going on. When you're reading the paper especially, there's always papers talking about MySpace. And MySpace is a great example because one of these services sort of just started from, who remembers MySpace from even 2 years ago? Not many of us, but it just sort of shot up into public recognition as this mega giga brand all of a sudden. acquired a lot of users very quickly, over 100 million, they say, nowadays, registered on MySpace. And when you look back into the history, however, there's something here that I think is sort of like a thing that oftentimes gets forgotten, which I've been just using this butterfly metaphor for, which is it tends to be looking at the predecessors of the MySpaces online, that they also tend to die out very rapidly. And that's a perplexing problem. Why do so many social networking services fail? So there's MySpace. And this is a question that if I was this guy right now, I would be keenly observing and wondering about, having paid over $500 million for this property, is, what makes it tick? And will it fail like its predecessors? Because if we look at, does anyone remember Firefly? This was from, yes, nodding heads. Yeah, these are the old school, original, sort of OG web social networking people. Firefly, I think I joined around 1997. It garnered around 2 million users, was acquired by Microsoft, and killed. Failed to turn a profit. It was followed by 6 Degrees, the trend around 2000. Who remembers 6 Degrees? Any 6 Degree years here? A lot. Wow, you guys were around already back then. Okay, well, 6 Degrees grew even larger, over 3 million users, and died around 2001, part of the dot-com crash, after it failed to raise more funding and wasn't able to sustain itself, was making losses. Well, the latest edition, Friendster. Okay, I'm sure everyone here knows Friendster. Friendster was the hot topic around, let's say, 2004. And it's been interesting to follow Friendster on this top 100 list, because Friendster is on the list. And it was rising up until a point where, it was pretty high up there. And more recently, it started to slowly drop. So we're talking now high 50s. It might be already in the 60s, unless it's regained. So we see, we're somewhere along this line, I think, in Friendster's history, and I don't know what's going to happen. But looking back at history, there seems to be a trend that seems to be repeating itself here. So the question, is MySpace another butterfly? How might we predict what services can actually sustain themselves? Well, here's my answer. I'll take a detour here and look at something that I think a very smart person online, Russell Vitti, wrote a little while ago about LinkedIn. He said, okay, first question, who's here has a LinkedIn profile? Whoa. Okay, we are so LinkedIn. Well, Russell isn't, as it turns out. He linked out, and this was his post where he said he's quitting LinkedIn. And this is interesting, what he says. Why is he quitting? He says, I gave it plenty of time to be useful, but it just hasn't done anything at all for my life. His criticism is that it's just a social network. There's no real value, it's not useful for anything. It's just a game that people play in order to see who has the most contacts. He even says that. It was the game, right? He who has the most contacts wins. At first you were even listed by the number of contacts you had. Remember? Well, the counter-argument here is that there are other sites online. And in fact, having since befriended Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, I do see a logic in LinkedIn nowadays, and I think they've actually managed to discover or uncover the core social object within LinkedIn, which is jobs. But the point here is that the sites that actually seem to work are built around some kind of a core social object. Now, think about the object as the reason why people actually go online to interact with each other, and not just some random bunch of people. There's always something that's connecting the people together. So, for instance, a date and a job will connect you to a very different group. So, if we look at the kind of social objects out there that I think are cool, Flickr, for instance, managed to turn photographs into social objects online. Because not only did they make them clickable and do the nice thumbnails and make it very easy to share, But they also did a bunch of other things to them, for instance, tagging. So in Delicious, of course, tagging is the key thing. I'm sort of assuming everyone here knows these services. Delicious did this to bookmarks. Amazon's been the forerunner, I think, here in making books social objects by enabling a lot of different kinds of social interaction. You know, not just the people who all, bought this book also bought, but nowadays a whole range of different things, social ways to connect to other people. You have lists, you can make your own sort of, you can share your taste about books. They even have wikis around books nowadays on Amazon. So the question about MySpace, I do think MySpace actually has a better chance than, let's say, Firefly or even 6degrees, because it does have a very focal object, and it's been there from the very beginning, and it's music. So on MySpace, you see the music that is displayed sort of kind of almost on all the band pages especially. It's right there in your face. And my sort of prediction or my advice to Rupert Murdoch would be, just don't lose sight of that social object, because that is really the core that has been driving your audience to your site, and it will probably continue to do so. And if you lose sight of that and you start adding too many different kinds of gimmicks and features, then you run into trouble. So, part 2 of the talk. Now, if we play around with this thought game and try to think using this language of a social object, well, how might we go about designing a successful website? I want to share these 5 principles now. The first one is pretty clear. You got to be able to define your object. So when you're surfing online next, looking at the latest Web 2.0 sites, whatever, and encountering a site, a new website that you might not have gone to before, or even some familiar site, just think to yourself, how quickly can you understand, just get as a user, what's the social object here? What's the key thing? And if it takes you a long time to figure out, chances are that site's got a problem. So sometimes this doesn't come easily when you're developing a new site. You might not have a very clear idea. You just have a kind of, you have that itch that you can't really scratch. You understand there's something here, but you might not be able to define it that well. And it turns out this is okay. This is the way a lot of services start out. You look at Flickr, for instance. This is Eric Costello, one of the developers of Flickr. He said, when we first launched Flickr, it was a Flash application that was mainly used as a chat environment with real-time photo sharing as a sort of side feature. So it's also only when they started observing how their users actually used Flickr that they realized that the photos in this chat application were really interesting, and that they were the core that they then sort of completely redesigned Flickr around. Flickr started off, it wasn't even called Flickr, it was called Game Never Ending. So if you look at Flickr now, you can see that the photo gets the pride of place. No longer do you see chat. No longer do you see all those additional features that were on Game Never Ending, their first version. Instead, you see a bunch of things that you can do on the photo. Not only can you do this blog, this, all sizes, all this stuff, you can add tags to it, you can comment it. The key things here that enable this as a sort of, people to create social networks around photos. So when you're browsing these sites, here are just some examples. I think it's useful to think, what are the social objects on these services? Can you really define those? Okay, second point. Not only do you need to define your object, you also need to define the verbs that people use to act upon the objects that they can posit up online. Okay? So looking at the list of sites there, for instance, on eBay, buying and selling, they're right there next to the logo. It's immediately you sort of capture this. Same way on MySpace, you got those play buttons for the music. It's the first thing that people sort of, find and click. So it's a question, it's not like on Dogster, this wonderful, wonderful service by Ted Reingold where people can, create social networks around dogs. It's add a dog. So this is the second point. You need to be able to define what is your verb, and make sure that your users get it. It's right there. They find it easily. Sometimes services online can even create new verbs that did not exist before. And I think there's an interesting example of this by actually a Finnish company made by some countrymen of mine called Iglo, which is, I took the Norwegian site here because I thought it would be closer to English and perhaps to Dutch than Finnish. And I wanted to highlight something. You know, Iglo is a real estate, they're an online real estate exchange. So if you have an apartment or you're looking for a place, a home to buy, you can go on this website and sell yours or buy one. And their claim to fame is that they take a much drastically lower percentage than your standard real estate agents would. However, they do something very interesting. And I tested this service when it first launched. I think I was there on the first day. And they have a feature which is here called this test sali. It's actually in Finnish, the direct translation in English would be silent selling. Now, it used to be, and having just gone through this process of, you know, selling our 2 apartments and buying a new, bigger home, I'm very familiar with this process. It's where basically you decide to sell, and you might not have actually found a new apartment yet. And that makes for a difficult decision because you're not really sure if you want to sell yet because you haven't found a new one, you don't know how long it's going to take. But you sort of must in order to get, you know, enough money to then be able to buy a new home. Now on Iglo, by doing this silent selling, what you can basically do is, and what I did is, you can just say, well, I might, you know, I'm not really selling my home, but I'll just put it up here and you know, put some photos. And maybe if someone makes a great enough offer, sure, you know, I might sell. So this silent selling, I think, is an example of a new kind of verb that would not really be possible without an online service. So sometimes it's not just the things that people are used to, but you can also create a completely new kind of interaction, although I think it's rarer. Okay, proceeding on. Point 3 is to make those objects shareable. Again, a very simple point, but it's incredible how many websites just don't get this point. The most simple thing, you gotta have permalinks to your objects so that people can copy that link from the browser window and they can put it in an email and they can send it to their friend. I think this is the way YouTube still spreads because, you know, most of the ways I end up finding myself on YouTube come through emails that people, my sort of Hotmail friends, you know, the friends who are not really on to Web 2.0, send to me over email. So, you know, make sure that you provide permalinks and don't change those links so that when people click that link, they end up getting that object and not having that object hidden somewhere on the side of the page, or worse yet, having it point to a dynamic page, such as the front page of a service that keeps constantly changing, where that content might no longer be there when their friend goes and clicks the link. Of course, you can go fancy and you can create thumbnails or widgets, and you know, make sure that people can then easily pull those onto their own weblogs and sidebars so they can come to your site through those. I think one of the most powerful ones is when you can actually start to enable people to actually share those objects themselves as on P2P file sharing networks. Okay. Now this point number 4 is something that I learned from the guy I criticized before, the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. And this is not the way Reid phrases it, but I think this is what he meant. Because Reid is the sort of master of virality. At least in the Silicon Valley circles, a lot of people respect him for that. And he's even created all kinds of cool formulas for measuring virality. And his basic point is that, you know, it's not enough to just add that email and invitation, you know, invite your friend thing to a site. That's not enough. You have to actually figure out a way in which a person on the site, by inviting another person to the site, is actually offering them a valuable gift. That's not easy. But just to give an example, the way Reid tells they did on PayPal was, you know, they weren't really expecting or getting the sort of virality that they wanted until they issued a campaign where, by inviting your friend, PayPal agreed to deposit $10 already on that friend's account for free. So in a sense, you were able to give your friend $10 by signing them, you know, inviting them to the service. Now, that's a clear monetary compensation that you're giving, and it doesn't need to be monetary. For instance, I think the best service is actually YouTube, why are people emailing those YouTube links? Because the videos are so funny. It's a laugh. If you can give your coworker or friend, during a boring day in a meeting, the joy of the gift of a laugh, what is better? So again, the gift point. Another example that, I just recently, someone handed me, it was actually the founder of, one of the founders of Skype handed me this Skype headphone thingy a while ago. And one of the things I noticed that was odd about it was that there were not just one pair of headphones and CD in it, but two. So you could, tear it back and sort of give the other one to the person that you wanted to call as a gift. And obviously Skype offers you the gift of, not giving you money, but, reducing your phone costs. So once again, there's a clear perceived value in getting your friend on Skype, your grandma or whoever it might be. Okay, this is the last point, and it's about the business model question that often gets asked too, especially in some circles. And so my answer to it is, well, I think Joey Ito, another shareholder and advisor in our company, mentioned a while ago was, well, there will be a time when the consumption of music will probably be free. So people will be downloading music for free, and people don't want to pay for that, and I think that has indeed happened. And the second part was what a lot of people didn't think was going to happen, which is happening now with services like Last.fm, is where people will pay to publish their playlists online. So it's a reverse model where people will actually pay to publish their taste, their selection, their mixtapes of music. And I think an interesting example of this is from a service that a bunch of friends of mine from Finland, and I also used to work on a predecessor of this service. This is a children's virtual world, and I'm sure many of you know Habbo Hotel did when they went to Japan. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, in Japan, the sort of standard way of going about charging for a service is you charge 300 yen a month on iMode, because that's the way all the services work, and that's what Habbo did as well. And they weren't getting too many users at first, surprisingly, because they thought their service was very cool. However, when they switched around to the model that they nowadays use everywhere, where the basic service is free, but and you can go and you can chat in the virtual world, but then when you want to sort of actually start to become a so-called publisher, when you want to actually establish your own space in the service and invite your friends and start to orchestrate some kind of an action there, you need to buy virtual furniture, because otherwise your room's going to look very boring. So once again, they've figured out a way to start charging those people, that fraction of the audience who actually take it upon them to somehow start using it to, publish something there. The freemium business model is what a bunch of people are calling it nowadays. Okay, so just a quick checklist. When designing your sites, when thinking about whether it's your client site, your company site, your personal website, think, what's your object? What are the verbs? How can people share those objects? What's the gift in the invitation? Can you come up with a compelling gift? And then, are you charging the publishers? Are you charging the spectators? Okay, so this is the third part now. The question about the next big thing, and I don't claim to have the answer to what will be the single next big thing, but I definitely am seeing a trend here that I want to take you through again from a sort of theoretical angle, hoping that will give you some tools for thinking and some language for talking about not just this particular instance of what will be microblogging, but services on a much broader scale. No matter if it's about thinking about 3D virtual worlds, or about RFID, or about semicodes, or mobile telecoms, I hope that this will be more broadly applicable. So the way to start thinking about what will be the next big wave, at least for me, I look at my PhD on this disruptive innovations, which I'm sure is a very familiar term to many of you, is to look at what's the current leader, the current leading solution in the space. And to me, it's been for a while already blogs. Weblogs are basically the fundamental technology upon which most of these publishing services are based somehow. And thinking, is there anything that could disrupt blogs? And for a long time, my answer was no, because blogs seemed perfect. However, okay, who here has a blog? Oh my goodness, wow. You guys know this stuff much better than I do. But I do have a blog as well. And as I'm sure anyone who's been to my blog will notice, there is a problem with the blog, which is that I always walk around with this nagging feeling, especially when I'm talking to a bunch of bloggers like you, and I'm sure none of you have, but I do, which is that I don't blog that I don't blog enough, you know? And, well, I don't know if, does anyone here recognize this feeling that you should be maybe blogging, posting a little bit more often? Okay, good, so I'm not alone then. And interestingly enough, what I find about blogs, you know, I look at my own blog, and let me just hop through this here. And everything I post has this tendency that I feel like it needs to be larger than life. I need to spend time planning it. I know it's going to be public. It'll be staying there for ages and ages and ages. So I want to do a good job. And that takes time. And it happens that I oftentimes don't have the time. Specifically now that I'm the father of a newborn baby, and I noticed that I used to work at nights, and that was great, and I had the time to be free, but nowadays there's someone else who likes to be awake at night too, and I don't get my time to work as much. So going back to this question, this is from, as many of you know, you're trained in business, Clay Christensen from Harvard Business School, the father of this idea of the disruptive innovation, he has these 3 criteria that you need to apply when you're thinking what might be the conditions for disruptive new innovation. And the first one is, it's got to be somehow simpler than what the current running practice is. The second one is, if it's not simpler, at least it has to be cheaper. And not just a little bit cheaper, radically cheaper. And the third one is, well, if it's neither of those, and it better be, at least in some way, these, you know, it can't be too much more expensive. You know, the third criteria is that at least it needs to free people from the need to go to an inconvenient place to carry out this thing. So one of the classic examples Clay Christensen gives is, for instance, photographs. You used to have to take your photos to a Photoshop to get them developed, and that was inconvenient for people. It was much easier when you just get them digitally. So, question 1. Is there anything, can we imagine anything that could be more simple than a blog? Now, going back to this question, I believe that, you know, this problem of time, this problem of not blogging enough, actually relates to this. Because when I have the chance to go out for a beer, currently, which hasn't happened very often nowadays, I find myself in a situation where, you know, I could call one of my 3 close friends. I could call Marco, but Marco's always traveling nowadays because he runs a company called Blick, and he's mostly in the UK doing that. I could call my friend Sampo, but Sampo is always working on this Habbo Hotel stuff. I could call my friend Alex, who likes dogs and uses the dog as his icon all the time. He's not really a dog. But he also recently got a baby, a small daughter. So he's always busy too. So I find myself not going for many beers. And there is a solution, however, that I think sort of matches this, which is this microblogging thing. So instead of having to SMS each of these people or somehow call them and get that sort of uncanny feeling where, you know, you sort of already expect them to reject you, and you know that the other person has to go through these nice face-saving methods to try to make sure that they say, well, Jyri, I still like you and I'm still your friend even though I'm not coming out for a beer with you. But as it turns out, if I can just post something simple, like a one-line thing like this, at that instant, which I don't really find myself doing on my blog. I could do it on my blog too, but I know that it's too slow, that people probably won't follow it and get it quickly enough. And besides, it'll look kind of stupid with all my other awesome posts that, you know, go on for pages and pages. So being able to blog something short like this actually works, because what happens is the people who are also in my network of friends and at that same time find themselves in this similar need of sort of having nothing special to do, they're the ones who respond, and they're usually people who I couldn't have imagined that, or wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And I know it's in Finnish, but they're basically saying, hey, we could join you for some food. And it tends to get into a sort of addictive, repetitive cycle where you do it once and you get some comments, and then you find yourself doing it again. And again, and again, and again. Like, this is from when we launched this map interface on the front page of our service one Friday night not too long ago. This guy found himself getting several tens of thousands of page loads without really knowing that at the time. So what this sort of microblogging does is you're saying something very simple very quickly, usually from your phone, but with the ability for other people to respond to that quickly, it becomes valuable. And for the people who know you, they know that there's a story behind that post, something special that relates to you, and they can imagine that. And what you get as a sort of, when you post over time, you get a kind of timeline of your activities. Like, this is my day from Tuesday, 10th of April 2007, which happened to be when our first child was born. And it's a nice kind of record, and it's interesting because it's social, because it's not just somebody shouting in the dark, because it's people responding to that and carrying on a conversation around your life, the everyday life that you live. So obviously I'm showing now slides from, or screenshots from Jaiku, this service that we're making, and I know that a lot of you here have already checked it out, so I won't spend too much time on this. But I'll just proceed to say that I think this microblogging kind of answers this first condition, because it seems to be simpler than blogging. Well, the second question is actually a lot more tough, because if you think about most blogs, nowadays there are tons of blog sites out there that actually offer blogs for free. How can you be more cheap or less expensive than something that's already free? Now, for the longest time I used to think that there is no, this is a lost game, there is nothing here to be found. But then someone actually alerted me to this question of, well, you think about the way that price is actually constructed in a market, and every one of us knows this. Price is the outcome of a dynamics of supply and demand, right? And something that is rare, that is hard to get, usually tends to be more costly than something that's available in abundancy. That tends to be cheap. And now if we apply this principle of where it becomes actually turns into a question of availability rather than price, you get something pretty interesting. Because what you find is that this sort of microblogging stuff travels better than the long blog posts. So you post something like on a blog, you can get it out as RSS, but you can also post it not just from your computer, because you can also use SMS, like I know a lot of us are doing right now. You can also use mobile clients, obviously, and you can receive them on your phone. Now this is a drastic, you're freeing yourself in a quite rapid way. You can also do it using IM, like on our service we're still working on, well, there's Ralph, he's our lead developer on the instant messaging integration, which isn't public yet, but I guess now we've said it, it's coming. You can use third-party apps to do this instant messaging currently and post these short blog posts from your MSN account, your AIM account, or if you're using Jabber, like Google Talk from those. And obviously, through the API, what's been really wonderful to see is how drastically that just within a couple of weeks increased the availability of different ways to actually post and read these short Jaikus. So people wrote Windows applications, they wrote Macintosh OS X applications, they made mashups like for Google and even Facebook now, just a few days ago apparently. So what you're getting here is an increasing availability where this stuff just becomes ubiquitous. No matter almost what tool what technology you're using, it's easy, boom, you just type and it's there. And I think this kind of answers this question because, in a sense, even if you think, I think it was last week or the week before, somebody called us from a school who was organizing a network of schools. I think it's actually nearly 100 schools around the world, many of them in developing countries, where students are working together on projects about global warming and the climate change. And essentially he was interested in using these channels because he said the problem is that, especially in developing countries, there aren't too many computers in these schools. And even if there are computers, not many of those are connected to the internet. But they were still they had a lot of stuff online already. And so we created a Jaiku channel for them in order so that the kids could participate using text messages and, you know, just be a part of this conversation. So I think that's a good example of how this actually can go down to the level of price, not just availability. Well, this third question I think everyone sort of already knows the answer to because we've been talking about mobile phones and availability. But I'll just sort of flesh out a little bit more here because I also want to show some new stuff that we're working on, especially in the mobile space. So one of the things we do is a mobile client for these Nokia 360 phones, which basically enables you, or it sort of brings your address book alive. So normally you have a list of names, which, as someone remarked, it's almost like a list of obituaries. You don't really know if those people are even dead or alive. But obviously nowadays, on instant messaging systems, we've grown used to the fact that you usually have some sense of the other person's presence. Are they available or not? So just this simple question, can you talk? Which actually happens to be, I used to work at Nokia before, so we did a bunch of different user surveys, user studies in various ways, and one of the findings was that this indeed is one of the most common, indeed the most common question with which a phone conversation is opened with. And you sort of wonder about that, and you realize, well, perhaps that's not really needed. The second one, by the way, is where are you now? Or where are you going? So something like this, the phone should already be able to tell you that because it knows, and you can share that. So if you connect this stuff to the sort of Web 2.0 idea of sharing stuff, you know, from your Ring profile, we can tell your availability. If it's silent, you're on red. If you have your ringer on, you're on green. If it's vibrate only, you're yellow. It maps pretty nicely. Where you are, you know, we have cell towers. Obviously, we're now getting even GPS. Plugs in nicely. Enable people to name where they are and use those markers, the cell towers. And then we can do even more crazy stuff like using the Bluetooth to see how many people are nearby right now. I bet you right now there are quite a few. What you're planning next. There is a calendar on the phone. If you want, you can share that. You can decide how you want to share it with whom. Do you just share the fact that you just have something on your calendar starting, or do you even actually show the title of the event? Like, my girlfriend's not sharing the title of the event with me, she's only sharing that she's busy. So, this third question, I think these kind of microblogging services also enable you because you are able to do it from your mobile device. So, going back to this question of a megatrend, Clay Shirky once remarked that, you know, there is a mass amateurization of nearly everything happening in reference to the way that people are creating their own music, creating their own videos, sharing all of that online. Well, there is another megatrend, I think, now happening to that very content, which, you know, for lack of a better word, and I know it's a horrible, horrible thing to say, I somehow punned on as it's almost like this mass Starbucksization of this content, where essentially the simile that I'm trying to pull off here is that, you know, we have these web communities like that beautiful, beautiful MySpace space that I was showing with lots of rich content. You know, there's music, there's even videos, there's all this stuff, these graphics, that we know that we are having trouble displaying on small mobile devices. It's almost like, you know, your experience of going, if you're going to get a coffee with your friends, a social thing. You know, before we used to go to a nice coffee shop, which I'm sure there are lots of here in Amsterdam, and, you know, get the proper tray of, you know, an afternoon coffee. But what happened when Starbucks came along? You know, with the invention of this, that totally transformed coffee in two ways. Number one, coffee started to be something that you picked up on the way, you didn't stop for it, it was fast coffee, and you sort of sipped it as you were going somewhere and then you just threw it away. It's sort of like throwaway coffee. And number two, not only did it turn coffee into a mobile experience, but it also shot up the consumption of coffee drastically. So there's more of it more frequently, and it's sort of throwaway. And these same principles actually apply to this microblogging, because that content, it's amazing how quickly its value diminishes over time, much more quickly than an average blog post. So something that I post on Jaiku, you know, it can be outdated in an hour, whereas something that I post on my blog, it can stay there for years and still be valuable to people. So essentially, kind of what we're moving into here is that you have this kind of a co-presence, and you have this sort of river of updates from the people that you follow that's always with you, there for you to see when you want to find out. I've been calling this, I know it was in the title, social peripheral vision. It's like this ability to sense from the corner of your eye what's happening in your social network, when fact is that most of the time the people we care about, we are physically disconnected from. That didn't used to be the case. You know, you think back to the times when we still mostly lived near the people we cared about. Nowadays, that's no longer the case. So this is what the new interface for the Series 60 stuff that I just wanted to show you. It's something that we'll be releasing in beta very soon now. So not only does it have this address book where you see the current presence of your contacts, but if you take the rocker and you turn right, you switch to another tab which shows the latest updates from people, you know, and you can browse those, and you can see something that someone said, like Ralph said just a few hours ago, that, you know, he was on his way here, and I said, yeah, I'm coming too. So it's an ongoing conversation that's there always with you, but not presented in an intrusive way where you're getting bombarded necessarily with SMS messages that explode your inbox, but something that's ready to hand, because it's always connected and it's there for you to check when you feel like it. So once again, you know, this question, it tends to be that I blog at most, you know, once per week. I post photos at most once per day. But this stuff somehow, it's once per hour. Petteri, who was on here earlier, my co-founder, he said a funny thing the other day. He said, you know, this is like blogging for people who have nothing to say, like me, because he started a blog at least once, and he managed to make one blog post, and that was it. But this stuff he seems to be doing quite well with. So once again, you know, this, I know this doesn't communicate much, but if you just imagine, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but it seems like, you know, we're in the shift where we're seeing this envelope being pushed more towards this kind of continuous state of connectedness to your full-time intimate community, as Mimihiro says. It's almost like a wave-particle relationship where, you know, at the wave, you know, the first we get is this always-on presence, which is just a light that turns red or green. So one of the things that I noticed from personal use, going back again to the things that I find myself getting value out of, this is my dad. An example of someone who is very dear to me, but whom I almost never interact with. He's got a new family now, my parents are divorced, so even though he's someone I love, it's not someone who I tend to be speaking with a lot. But the fact that, you know, he's on my phone, and I see that, for instance, he's traveling abroad, or just the fact that I see that, you know, he's online, he's alive somewhere, and you know, okay. It's funny what kind of a comforting and nice feeling that gives me, and it's funny how oftentimes that gives a topic for conversation, because then when he does call, I can say, oh, I saw you were in Norway the other week. You know, what were you doing there? Again, another example, you know, just when we find these people who are dear to us, I think that one of the things that is going to be interesting to see, which is not a nice thing to end with, is when we get the next major natural catastrophe, or let's pray it's not a human-caused one. You know, like in the time of the tsunami or the 9/11 attacks, and I presume also in the time of the London bombings, which is where this photo is from, the only thing that would go through is text messages. You can't even phone people because the phone networks are clogged, because all of a sudden, en masse, millions of people become heightened to the awareness that they need to know if their friends and family are okay. You know, that's specifically what these services are for, so I'm curious to see whether when we get an instance like this, we'll see a lot more traffic flowing the way of these microblogging services where people can share this. Okay, so concluding, when thinking about what the next wave would be, it might be worth trying to apply these principles. First, is it free? My translations again. Is it quick and easy? This is the simplicity question. And then this availability / price thing, it can also be turned into, well, in the case of technology, is it multi-device? Is it multi-channel? And lastly, this point about the frequency. Is it something every day? Is it something where, like I think on microblogging, everybody has got an audience because everyone has someone they care about. So, does it bring people closer together? And then I wanted to end up with this announcement, which I know was already posted on Rival Series on Twitter, because someone apparently saw my slides from behind me here in the audience, which I think is actually really, really cool. And this kind of comes back to this question of, the magic. What's the magic in these things? Sometimes the magic can be, and that's not. There we go. Okay, this is magical. But what can also be magical in the way of when we talk about the mobile industry is we have a situation where this tiny little startup of barely 7 people finds one of the giants dominating the industry actually going and doing free work for them in the sense of, so Nokia just created this Jaiku widget which you can get on, I just took a screenshot from my own phone, but it runs on all Java phones basically, Razors, Blackberries, I think, just about any Java phone, and lets you do this, see your Jaikus and interact. I just took a couple of pictures. This is from the channel. This is my feed. So that's available now if anyone wants to check it out. I think it's available from either on your mobile browser, get.widsets.com, WIDSETS, maybe someone can post it up here even, or then going on your laptop to widsets.com and doing a search for Jaiku. I think I actually pulled up the page here, I'll just show it. I think this is really cool because it's sort of coming back to this, let me see if I can get it up. Okay, there you go. I'm faster than you. Okay, so they just put it up, I think, like an hour ago, and looks like we already have 79 downloads. So this is just another screenshot. So anyways, and I think that's funny because it shows that something's definitely, the change is afoot, I believe, in the sense that, we just need to find the ways, which can be just an open API, to really change the fundamental, ways that this industry has been working for decades and decades. And I think I had something else here. Oh yeah, thinking ahead, like what this could go to, you have things like a simple thing, but when you know who is the person who has posted it, like we're finding that right now on Jaiku, there's every week there's a new semi-celebrity who sort of joins it and starts to use it as a way to connect with their fans. Latest one I think was Lordi, this Finnish heavy metal monster rock band whose lead character joined the service. So you get an idea of what's happening, and that's when it can become really cool. Obviously we're not quite there yet, but I'm hoping Razi will any day now show up on Jaiku. So thanks much. I'll end there, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions.